something about boundaries for teens, although they will push them and test them and resist them, they actually really need them. And you probably have heard this before, that, you know, if you, as Amy was talking about, I mean, in the midst of this world that they're living in, with all their developmental tasks and things are changing and their influx and some of the chaos that they're experiencing, boundaries oftentimes can be that constant. It's firm, it's consistent, and as a result can really minimize their anxiety when they know this is where the line is and I know what happens if I cross this line. So the first thing to understand about boundaries is that they can only happen and be effective when there's an established relationship. It has to happen in the relationship of the parent and the teen knowing that you love them and that you have their best interest at heart. As much as they may really hate the limit or the rule that you're setting, they know at the end of the day that you're in their corner. And so that has to be the foundation that needs to be laid before you are able to really even set and execute effective boundaries. So you want to speak in love. That's the first point. The second one is you want to identify truth. As Amy mentioned before, it's important for you to communicate your values to your teens. They need to know what's right and what's wrong. They need to have really clear understanding of that. The expectations need to be made very clear to them. And so you say, this is what it's going to be. This is where the line is, and this is why, and this is why I'm establishing it. And so you communicate that. You communicate the truth to them very clearly. And the third is that you permit freedom. And this is the tricky part. You need to set the limit, and then you need to permit them to make a choice. And certainly, depending on the choice that they make, there is a consequence. And consequences sometimes are only thought of in a negative context. There are definitely positive consequences. Perhaps they're going to gain some more freedom and independence because you're learning that you can trust them and that they're responsible. And then likewise, if they choose to disregard the boundary and the limit, there has to be some kind of negative consequence. That is the way that they're going to learn. And there has to be some kind of discomfort or pain that comes as a result of making an unwise decision or crossing over that limit or boundary that you've set. And the most effective way to implement a consequence is there's two components. We want the consequences to be logical, and we want them to be immediate. Now, this isn't an ideal situation. Sometimes this can't always happen, and I'll give you some examples to help kind of illustrate this. So, a logical consequence. So, let's say, for example, your teen chooses to spend all evening playing Xbox versus studying for their exam the next day, and as a result, they fail the exam because they haven't spent enough time preparing for the test. So a logical consequence would be that they lose the Xbox forever, you know, for however long you think is appropriate. But there's a tie there. They obviously misused the privilege of the Xbox, and so as a result, they're not going to have that privilege for the time being. That would be a logical consequence. Something that wouldn't be logical would be perhaps saying to them, well, because you failed your exam, I'm not going to permit you to go to Friday night's football game, which would be a painful experience if they were valuing that football game, but there's not the connection between the bad choice that they made and the repercussion. And so we want, as much as possible, we want to make the consequence logical. In addition to that, we want the consequence to be as immediate as possible. And again, this can be a little bit tricky depending on what actually happens. But an example of this would be perhaps you tell your teen, you're at the dinner table and you say you need to put the phone down and stop texting because we're going to actually try to enjoy a family meal. And the teen resists and defies you and continues to text or whatnot. An immediate consequence would be actually confiscating the cell phone right there on the spot and saying, I'm sorry, but you've misused this privilege. You need to hand over the cell phone. Something that wouldn't be as immediate and wouldn't have the same effect would be perhaps saying, okay, well, tomorrow you're not going to be permitted to bring the cell phone to the dinner table, but you continue to allow them to have it in their lap or in their pocket for the duration of that meal. So there's a bit of a gap of time between the offense and the consequence. And for the teen, it's going to be much more powerful if it's paired closely together. Certainly, there are occasions where teens are engaging in some really concerning behaviors that I've mentioned here in this list. And I would just really implore you that if your teen is represented here at all in any of these behaviors, to definitely seek some further treatment and consultation, because we definitely don't want to let anything like this perpetuate. We want to definitely step in and intervene so that we can get them the help that they need to prevent anything from getting out of hand. I want to mention that. And having said that, obviously, here at Children's Health Council, we've got a plethora of different disciplines and people that work with teens on a daily basis. And so we could definitely provide that additional support or expertise that you might need in that particular situation. I want to point out just really quick specifically, we have some teen groups that happen here. We call them Teen Talk, and there's a couple different Teen Talk groups. I just want to encourage you. I'm assuming that since you're here, you personally are probably experiencing some stress and some discomfort in raising your teen that's probably going through some tough stuff. And as I mentioned in the beginning about how there can actually be benefits when we come through on the other side from struggles and from trials and difficult times, I just want you to be thoughtful about perhaps how you're growing in the midst of this season with your teen and how you perhaps are benefiting in the midst of maybe what might feel really uncomfortable, to just encourage you in that.